Loving Sairam, Dr. Veda Viswanathan, the Sri Satya Sai Global Council Trinidad and Tobago lovingly welcomes you to the series Awake, Unite and Inspire. We are extremely grateful, blessed, and honored to have you as our guest on this evening's program. This can only happen through the grace and divine will of our beloved Lord Bhagwan Sri Satya Sai Baba.
Loving Sairam, brother.
So, Dr. Veda Viswanathan, can you share with us how did you first come into contact with our beloved Mother Sai?
At the very outset, I offer my humble pronounce at the lotus feet of my Divine Lord, Bhagavan Sri Satya Sai Baba. I am very thankful to Bhagavan for giving me this wonderful opportunity to meet with you and, of course, the opportunity given by the Sri Satya Sai Global Council for sharing my experience with all the devotees. I always think that Swami chooses to interact with people, and he comes into contact with different people at different times in different ways. In my case, I was not born in a family who knew Satya Sai Baba. So until I joined my medical school, I didn't know about him at all. When I joined my medical school in Pondicherry in 1971, on the very first day, I went to the temple, which was in the campus. And the temple opens usually in the evening, and I went a little earlier. At that time, I saw some men wearing white pants and white shirts, carrying various musical instruments, going to a building which was situated opposite the temple. And I asked somebody, what is happening there, out of curiosity? And they said, that is Sri Satya Sai Baba's bhajan mandir, and the bhajans will start at 7 o'clock sharp. So I went into the temple, and then I came out. It was 7 o'clock, and exactly at 7 o'clock, there was Omkar and very melodious bhajans set to very nice tunes started coming from that building. First of all, I was so wonderstruck by the discipline and the punctuality with which the bhajan started. And secondly, of course, the music that emanated from there was so divine that I forgot myself and went towards the building and listened to the whole bhajan. And someone who was coming a little late asked me to come in and stay for the bhajan. So that is how my initial interaction with Swami started. And later on, of course, I started attending bhajans in the campus and started participating in sporadic service activities, which continued as long as I was in India. But when I came to the UK for further education, I met a lot of devotees who were having a lot of great interaction with Bhagavan. And they gave me to understand the various divine qualities of Bhagavan and various teachings of Bhagavan, which got me interested more and more and more. That's how I came into contact with Bhagavan, but I never personally met with Bhagavan when I was in India. It is from UK that I went and saw him. That is when my urge to meet with Bhagavan arose. Sairam.
Thank you very, very much, Dr. Veda, for that divine sharing. And everybody has their own unique way and system of how they have come into contact with Mother Sai. He orchestrates it by his own divine will. But can you share with us what was the experience like when you first saw the physical form of Bhagwan Sri Satya Sai Baba?
First time when I went from the UK to the ashram, it was a fleeting moment that Bhagavan came to me and asked, "What do you want?" And somehow the words came out of my mouth without even realizing. I want a desireless state, Swami. And he laughed um, and showed me a little placard that was there. And it said, "Desireless state, lecture in North Indian canteen." So that is how my interaction started. Then, of course, from then on, I started interacting with a lot of devotees. And the burning question in me was, is he just a person who teaches high principles, or he is God? This was the kind of search that I think everybody has, who am I or who's God? And one such visit, when I went, it so happened that the question was foremost in my mind. And when he came very close to me, I said, "Bhagavan, are you God? If you're God, you have to show the proof. Otherwise, all my visits will become a waste." He smiled at me and came close, lifted his robe, and showed his feet. That was my first Pada Namaskar of Bhagavan. When I touched his feet, I was not even there. I forgot myself. I don't know how to describe that moment. I can only vaguely describe that by using words. I forgot the place. I didn't know about the place. I didn't know about myself. I didn't feel anything at all. And for a moment, nothing existed. And I was having a very, what should I say, an experience that I cannot describe. When I came to my senses, Bhagavan has already moved on. And I found a pool of tears on, wetting my cheeks. And subsequently, Bhagavan blessed his lotus feet in a photograph and gave it to me and said, "This should be the object of worship for you." And that is how that initial quest was satisfied. And from then on, I think, as they say, there is no going back. I had many, many doubts clarified and many, many questions answered by Bhagavan. So it was initially a very honest question for which I could not have gotten an answer from anyone. I think he gave it to me with such a lot of love, for which I am ever grateful. So that was a moment that I can recall. And another moment was when he called me and asked me, "What do you want?" I mentioned that I want knowledge, Jnanam Swami. And again, he showed his feet and said, "Take it." And that is the time he blessed the picture of Gayatri and said, there is nothing to know, there is nothing to become. Understand and experience it. So these are two turning points in my understanding of Bhagavan, that he has come to give me the awareness of who we are, and at least in my case, who I am, rather than concentrating on what the other attributes are. Sai Baba.
So, Dr. Veda, that was very, very inspiring and deeply moving. When Swami responded to your question, there is nothing to know, nothing to become. What do you understand? How did you process those two statements?
It's a very thought-provoking question. I think normally when we try to know something or try to learn about something, we study about the various attributes, and then we learn a lot about the object, but we never become the object. For example, if you study medicine, you become a doctor. You don't become a patient, or you don't become a chemical. Just because you learn pharmacology, you don't become a medicine. But in this spiritual realm, the object is the subject. When you learn about yourself being Atma, the scriptures mention, which Swami often repeats, Brahmavid Brahmaiva Bhavati. That is, you knower of Brahman becomes Brahman. That means you become that. So if Brahman is infinite, and we all think we are all finite beings with this body, mind, and intellect, and we are full of alternating sorrow and happiness, how do we become that infinite bliss? How come a finite being become infinite? It looks mathematically logical. So that is when I realized that what he was telling me was, don't approach this whole subject like knowing an object and knowing about an object. You yourself are that, and you are immersed in an ignorance that you are this limited being and you cannot attain it. It is not that. Shed that ignorance, and then you will get the knowledge that you are that infinite self. And I can share with you another experience when I was asked to say who Rama was. And at that time I said, Rama is Atma for me, Swami. He said, that's very good. Then he showed Sita by the side of Rama in that picture and said, look at her. She has given her body consciousness. She'll always be with Atma. But if you use intellect, you will not be always with her. Intellect is separate. So again, he underscored the point that with being immersed in the thought that you are the limited self of body, mind, and intellect, you cannot attain that knowledge. You have to shed that at some point, and that's the only time the self reveals itself. So it was a very powerful concept given in two profound sentences, as Swami always uses very minimal words to say a lot of profound things. Sai Baba.
Very, very beautiful indeed, Dr. Veda. And Swami, as you stated, he also addresses us as embodiments of the divine Atma, embodiments of Ananda. He addresses the very core of who we really are. And you made mention that Swami said all we need to do is shed the ignorance. He has also stated that there is nothing like gaining or attaining self-realization. You are already that, as you so beautifully put, you are already that Brahman. So when he says shed the ignorance, what do you understand by that particular term?
Again, a very thought-provoking question. When I went to Swami one time, he asked a very seemingly innocuous question. What do you normally purify in order to attain sophistication? He didn't ask me in so many words, but he said, what should one do in order to be pure? And then he gave me the answer that normally you purify your words and action. And that is what you think is sophistication. You need to purify your thought. And at that point in time, I asked, Swami, I know that you always insist on having harmony of thought, word, and action in order to realize divinity. How does one do that? Because sometimes we say something in order to please people, but the thought is known to us, which is very different from the word. He said, take a simple exercise from now on. If you say yes, you mean yes. Try to practice that. It took me nearly 2.5 years in order to be successful in meaning yes and saying yes. So it is, I realized that it is possible to practice Swami's words with a lot of caution and repeated attempts. But I think, we are likely to make mistakes, as I have done many a times. But I think eventually he will lead us to attain that success in terms of following his words. And I think in every one of his words, if followed to the T, I think it will lead to realizing that effulgence of self. Sai Baba.
Thank you very much, Dr. Veda, for that divine sharing. Can you share, and you've had so many wonderful divine experiences and conversations with this illustrious avatar. Can you share 2 of your most memorable experiences you've had with him over the years?
One of them is that when I went to Sri Lanka for a medical service, a few things that we did that pleased him very much. And he also corrected some things. Those are all very valuable lessons to me. First of all, I think, let me go back a little bit. When I went to initially start my medical service in Patti, I sent in my biodata to the medical superintendent, and I thought that I would be definitely selected to serve in Patti. But when I went to meet with the medical superintendent, he said, Swami asked for your photograph, and he said your photograph was not there. And therefore, I don't think you'll be able to serve this time. And he asked you to meet with Dr. Alrija. And when I went to meet with Dr. Alrija, he mentioned a few things. He said, it is rare to be born as a contemporary of Avatar. It is rarer to know that there is an Avatar. It is the rarest opportunity to serve the Avatar. So to do service to Bhagavan, it is the greatest of opportunity that one can get in this life. And it is not given purely because of your intellectual excellence or attributes. I realized that one has to be reverential and very humble and pray for that opportunity. That was the first lesson I learned from Bhagavan. The second was, while doing the service, sometimes we may get that because of our attributes, we are selected to do this work. And one such event happened once in the general hospital. I was doing a night duty in the emergency room. And one of the Sevadal was sitting next to me, observing me. And I was very thirsty around 2 o'clock in the night. So I asked him, is there water somewhere that I could go and drink? And he said, just wait for a minute, sir. He went somewhere and then bought me a cool drink. And then came and said, you've been working very hard through the night. So I thought I would give it to you. For a nanosecond, I thought probably I was doing a very hard service and I deserved it. And the very next day, Swami said, if you want something, why don't you ask me? That was the greatest lesson that I've ever had from anyone, that at no point in time, you should lose that awareness that you're serving Bhagavan and he's the one that gives everything. And you cannot take credit, even for a nanosecond, for that greatest opportunity that you have in your life. I always relay that message to a lot of people who come with me to do medical service. And thirdly, of course, I mentioned about Sri Lanka. Very important point that was made by Bhagavan. We were distributing blankets to a set of people who belonged to a particular religious denomination. And there was a proposal that we should have Swami's photograph and do some prayer before distributing the blankets. They objected to it, saying that they don't believe in any other pictures or any other form of God. So for a moment, it was a time to use your discrimination as to what to do next. And I decided that we could keep the photograph inside, we could do a silent prayer, and then do the service activity that we are set out to do. And so we mentioned that is a very important point to keep in mind for service. You should have Sarvatma Bhava, that Atman is everywhere as God. And that will give you necessary knowledge to respect every religion so that you don't contradict anybody's deep belief, which gives them the bliss. So that was another great lesson that I've heard directly from Swami. So there are a lot of things that happened in my life where he has corrected those mistakes. I think I've been very fortunate, I should say, to get those corrections, which streamline my thoughts. Saira.
Very, very inspiring, Dr. Veda Viswanathan. And we, the viewers, are learning so many lessons and also experiencing, if even to a limited extent, the joy that you felt while serving our beloved Lord. You have been involved in medical camps in different countries, and when you look at devotees who are involved in doing service at the medical camps in different capacities, it requires a tremendous amount of sacrifice and even moving or coming out of what we may call your comfort zone because of the particular conditions, the country, the state after there's a devastation. Can you share one or two experiences along these lines of one sacrifice that you would have observed or experienced, and maybe another where you went out of your comfort zone beyond what we may call the call of duty to perform seva?
Sure. Again, in Sri Lanka, it happened. The whole country during tsunami was devastated, and there was hardly any proper roads even to travel. So we had to travel for about 3 to 3.5 hours to a place where we conducted medical camp. And there was no pharmacy, there was no formal pharmacy. So we were asked to pitch a tent and put all the medications and medical supplies securely there. And at the end of the day, we had to put all the medications and all the supplies there and secure the tent before we left for our resting place, which was about 3.5 hours drive. One such occasion, we finished work one day, and there was a very old lady who came with very high fever and shortness of breath, coughing, and even from a distance, it was very evident that she was very sick. Clearly, after examination, it was more evident that she was suffering from pneumonia and she needed antibiotics. And at that point in time, everybody looked at each other, because once you start treating her, you have to undo the whole tent. That'll take nearly 40 minutes, 45 minutes. And then you have to treat her, make sure that she's feeling well, and send her home, then secure the tent and go back. That means 2 to 2.5 hours delay, that by the time you get back to your place, it's about 10:30 or 11 o'clock. And people were very tired because, of course, we were all doing the medical service in more than 100 degrees Fahrenheit, and everyone was sweating and very fatigued. Of course, at that point in time, we made the right decision of opening up the tent, treating her compassionately, and sending her home. And next day, the patient was back for a follow-up. She was very happy. And soon after we finished the camp, I went to Shantinalayam, and Swami specifically mentioned about that patient, said, that is a way to do service, that you should go beyond your level of comfort to put your recipient's comfort, because what is in you is in that person. So that is another example of how to practice the Sarvatma Bhava, that is, everyone is an extension of you, it is none other than God. So it was extremely pleasing to Bhagavan. And at that point in time, he said, now you can wish for desirelessness, which I asked him many years ago when he laughed and he didn't answer at all. So I was extremely happy about this instance. And, it's also a great lesson that we should keep in mind at all times, because sometimes we may forget that we are just doing the job as a chore and not seeing the comfort of the recipient. Sairam.
Thank you very much, Dr. Viswanathan. But I want to go back to that question that you asked Swami. When he asked you, what do you want? Swami, I want the desirelessness state. So from your understanding, what is the experience or the state of being in a desirelessness, no desire state? What do you understand that term to be? How does one feel when you are in a state of absolutely no desire?
I don't know whether I can say that with absolute confidence that I have no desire, because it is still a work in progress, I must admit. There are two things that I would like to share. One is the way we interpret detachment. And I went to the extent of not accepting any gifts from anyone. And even gifts from my mother, I used to treat it as if it is going to cause more attachment in me. And during that time, Swami demonstrated to me that when somebody offers something with love, how you can enjoy that. And with the sole motive of giving joy to the person who is giving, without getting attached to the act or the object. And that time he mentioned that detachment is not holding nothing, but you should have the awareness that nothing holds you. So that is a very great lesson for me. So whenever we think of desirelessness, sometimes we may think that something will make us more attached and that fear should go. That is something that I learned. The second was about the conversation on thought. One time in the United States, I was going to have a cup of coffee. And on the way, there was a shop which was selling very costly watches. So my wife suggested to me, why can't we go and look at those watches? And when I went and saw, I was determined that I'm not going to buy anything because it is not worth it, because I already have a functioning watch. When I went to Shanti Nilayam, Bhagavan gave me a very valuable lesson. He said, when a thought arises, if you don't discriminate and dissect it immediately, it will immediately become an action. So when you decided that you were not going to buy, why did you have to waste time in that place? Because wasting time is wasting life. And you're wasting God. Time is God. So that is a very great lesson. And the second he said was that thought, before it becomes a word and action, you should constantly use discrimination, whether it is going to give you something permanent or it is impermanent. If you use a knife of dissection, a knife of discrimination on every thought, then many thoughts will not fructify into word or action, which does not lead you in the path of spirituality. So I think, from the point of view of desirelessness, I think my understanding is whenever a thought arises, I think if I delay that thought from fructifying into a word or action, I think I get a clear sense of whether it is a worthy thought to be transferred into action or not. Sai.
Very, very, very interesting. And look at the advice that Swami gave to you and the lesson that you would have learned through that experience. And as you were talking, Dr. Veda, it brought to mind in an interview that I looked at a while ago with Phyllis Crystal. Swami told her that one of the most important practices that we should apply to our daily life to attain that state of desirelessness or liberation is putting the Ceiling on Desires program into practice. And she has spoken about this in her books and in her talks. And it coincides so divinely with what you are speaking about, desirelessness. Because when you look at the Ceiling on Desires program, we basically waste the 5 items of food, water, time, money, and energy. And Swami highlighted to you the one about wasting time when you knew that you were not going to buy that watch. And it really is a mind opener. It's a jolt to us when you look at what Swami told you, and in relation to the Ceiling on Desires program, coming back to that state of desirelessness, where we function not so much on wants but needs. So thank you very much, brother, for sharing that very beautiful incident. So, Dr. Veda Viswanathan, what does Sai Baba mean to you today?
I initially approached him as a guru. He showed me that he is bliss incarnate. Now he's an inseparable part of me. I just think of him all the time whenever any thought arises. And I keep communicating with him. So he becomes the best friend that I can have, that I can confide in anything, that I can get answers for most of my thoughts.
Thank you very much for sharing that. And you said earlier in your talk, the knower of Brahman becomes Brahman. When Sai Baba says, you are God, I am God, but you are God also. The only difference is I know that I am God, whereas it's a work in progress for you. How have you processed that statement from the point of view that he is saying you are the same omniscient, omnipotent, omnipresent consciousness? There's no difference between you and me. how can one accept it, process it, and really live in that awareness?
Again, you're asking me a very profound question. I think I can only recall a conversation when I asked him that if everybody has the effulgent Atma, then why we call somebody spiritually advanced and why somebody is not? Is that has got nothing to do with the effulgence of Atma. It is because of the impurities in mind. So I think the transformation, when we say, I understand that transformation is in mental level. In terms of awareness, it is always only one, and there is no denigration or improvement. It is just one, as you said, Satchitananda. It is only the mind which is not still, and sometimes it is even impure. So with actions and satsang like this, I think we get more and more ideas in order to purify the mind from all the impurities that it has either acquired from previous births or by sensory input. And once the mind is pure, then I think it clearly reflects what is inside, which is Bhagavan. I have a feeling that it is the problem with our own mind, that we are not able to reflect the divine principle within very easily. So in other words, whatever we think we are, and that is where our limitation prevents us from knowing what Bhagavan is all about. And once that is known, there is nothing to understand because it is all love. And that is what everybody feels when Bhagavan even looks at you, you feel the love. He doesn't have to do any action to make you feel the love. So it is love incarnate. That is the basis of godliness, I think. So in order to understand, I think we have to live it. I think somebody put it very nicely that, many of us are wanting to be divine, but human most of the time, but it should be probably the other way, that it should be divine all the time and sometimes human. That would probably summarize how to understand that we should act as divinity.
So, Dr. Veda, very interesting explanation and perception there. So, when Swami says that we are already God, there's nothing like attaining realization. So, from your understanding, is it true to say then that through our japam, meditation, seva, self-inquiry, all we are really doing is removing that which prevents the true self from manifesting itself? We are really piercing the veils of, as you said, ignorance, greed, anger, ego. Because if we are already that, we are removing that which prevents the divine manifestation of it on a continuous and a full level. Do you agree with that statement, or what is your understanding of it?
Well, all the activities that you mentioned, being a devotee, having a lot of devotion, love for God, service to humanity, karma, all of that only go to the extent of purifying the mind. And a pure mind is ready to receive the knowledge that you are that bliss, you are that Brahman. because an impure mind cannot do that. And in order to do that, one doesn't have to have any great scholarly attribute or a scholastic aptitude. One such event I wanted to share, we can learn about, it's not even about knowledge, but to learn about the extent of devotion that one can have. I was humbled during one such time when I thought I was doing service in Prashanthi. There was a helper from the state of West Bengal who was helping me to translate what I was saying in English to the patients, because most of the patients were from West Bengal. And this person, on the penultimate day of his service, mentioned to me that he was having a physical problem. And would I be able to see him as a patient? And which I readily did. And lo and behold, that when I finished my examination, I thought he was having a very serious problem. And I offered him that you should come and get yourself examined by an endoscopic procedure, which is, involving anesthesia and taking a look inside the colon to detect what is going on. And at that point in time, he said something which shook me. He said, I have not seen Swami for the last 2 weeks. Tomorrow, I have to leave. And that's the time we get darshan. I would like to go for that. And if I go for the diagnosis, then I would miss that opportunity. At that point in time, I had to convince him that I would do all the things in order to take care of him so that he'll have many more opportunities to see Swami. He reluctantly agreed and came for the diagnostic test, I should say. When I was doing it there in the super specialty hospital, Swami sent 2 apples through a devotee and said, give it to the doctor. And to cut a long story short, he had cancer. And I cut the apple into several slices and gave it to all the people who helped me at that time, including the patient, and I revealed the news to him, saying it could be a cancer, and this was given by Swami, and I'm giving it to you. And I outlined the treatment that he has to take when he gets back to West Bengal. Next year, the same patient came for service, and I happened to be there. And he was looking at a picture of health. And I asked him, did he do all the things that I asked him to do? He said, no, he gave me Swami's apple. I took it. Then my curiosity grew much more at this time. I said to him, I don't want to waste Swami's resources, but this time I'm going to repeat the test and see how the lesion is. And if it is still there, you need to follow all the advice in order to get it cured. He agreed readily. When I went and did the procedure, there was absolutely nothing there, and there was a scar. The reason why I mentioned this is for one reason. By service, we think we are doing a lot, but I learned that devotion, love for God, leading to an absolute faith could be there in a devotee who is just next to you and you may not know it. And there are such Dhruvas and Prahladas who are walking on the grounds of Prasanthi Nilayam, that one could learn a lot. So I wanted to share this experience, not because Swami can cure illness, because we all know that he can, but there are many people who are doing service with such a lot of devotion and love for Bhagavan that their faith can cure them beyond all the science that I know as a physician. Sai.
Thank you very much, Dr. Vishwanath, and that was so touching and moving. The attitude of doing seva, the grace of Bhagwan, the love of 1,000 mothers that manifest in so much different and varied ways in so many devotees' lives. That was truly, truly inspiring, sir. You know, when you look around in the society today, Dr. Vishwanathan, especially as a result of the COVID-19 situation, many people are gripped by fear and uncertainty. There's the fear of death, fear of losing their jobs, fear of losing loved ones, fear of becoming poor, fear of loss of reputation, so much different types of fear. Someone on the spiritual path, how does one deal, navigate, and conquer this fear? Especially if we look at one of the dominant ones, the fear of death.
Again, interesting question. And this was posed to Bhagavan during one of the medical services that we went for. And how to overcome fear of death was the question. And Bhagavan mentioned there are two basic elements which feed to the fear of death. One is the body consciousness, that you're so attached to the body that you fear that what will happen if death supervenes. And the other is unfulfilled desires. So these are the two things that if you could conquer, then you will not have fear of death. And this is something that I think each will have to contemplate. When I thought about it, I think it summarizes, at least for most, if not all, that these two elements dominate as prime cause for fear of death. Sai.
Thank you very much. So it's the first time that I have heard from a devotee what Swami himself has said about how to overcome this fear of death. Body consciousness, believing that we are the body, and then unfulfilled desires, which ties back in so much with the trend of your conversation, going back to when Swami asked you, what do you want? To become desireless. So it seems that the conversations keep going back to that particular aspect of desire and how it can bind us. And if we treat it in the right way or deal with it in the right perspective, it can also liberate us. So thank you very much for sharing, brother. So how has practicing the teachings of Sri Satya Sai Baba, because you came to know of Sai Baba after you left India, or more so in contact with devotees when you came to the UK, but over the years, reading, understanding, interacting with Swami, how has practicing his teachings continue to impact and transform your life?
Yeah, I think, one of the important things that I realized, was that practicing Swami's teaching is exactly what one should do as a devotee. And that sometimes poses challenges because the intellect tries to misinterpret some of the words. Again, giving an example, which is to illustrate this point. We all know, and I knew, that I should practice, that I should do every work as his work. And that is the way that he wants. There is nothing called spiritual, there's nothing called worldly. Everything is his work and everything should be spiritualized. One event I wanted to share was when my mother was in the intensive care unit in Chennai, southern part of India. I spent about 2 or 3 days with her, and she was making a very slow recovery, but still not out of the intensive care unit. And I had to start my service activity at Prashantinilayam on a Monday morning. So I had to be there on Sunday night. I started questioning myself that if I had to go there, I had to leave her here in the ICU. Should I be going and doing a service for so many others when my mother is expecting my services here? What should I do? But again, I had to simply follow Swami's words that I am in everybody and I will take care of everyone. And all you need to do is mean yes when you say yes. So I've said yes, so I have to mean yes, so I have to do it. This is my original first teaching by Bhagavan, to have thought, word, and action to be harmonized. So I told my sisters that I will be leaving. And this is after Swami attained Mahasamadhi. When I went and reached Patti that night, I was asked to see a retired faculty member who was unconscious, was severely ill, admitted to the general hospital. So I went and saw him in the night before I formally started my medical service the next morning. When I went there and examined him, for the first time, he opened his eyes. And the words came out of his mouth, which was very reassuring to me. That is why I'm sharing this. He said, Swami came in my dream and said, one of my devotees will come and treat you. But remember, Swami is your doctor. That is what he said. So the reason why I mentioned that is, needless to say that the very next day, I heard the good news from Chennai that my mother was about to be discharged from the hospital, getting better. But I also learned another thing, that I had one particular way of managing his surgical care, whereas he got very quickly cured with the surgical treatment, and he made a miraculous recovery. And more importantly, just before he was transferred from the hospital, this man went to the ashram and paid his respect to the Samadhi, which, with my level of medical knowledge, I'm yet to see a patient with that condition, that's with such seriousness, can even attempt to get out of bed and walk a few steps. So anything is possible. And only thing is we have to practice his words and see how much that we can see the miracle. So yes, practicing his words is the only way out. And I think that it can pose some challenges at times because our intellect can play mischief. And at that point in time, we have to remind ourselves that what is going to be the action that is going to give us the permanent bliss, as opposed to the temporary happiness and relief of mental worries. Zaira.
Thank you very much, Dr. Vishwanathan. Very, very inspiring, moving, and touching incident again. So it came to mind while you were speaking. Many devotees, they have questions. They want to make a decision in particular areas of their lives. Swami is no longer in the physical form. And sometimes we use different means of extracting an answer from Swami. Devotees write letters and place at his feet. I remember Al Drucker many, many years ago saying that you place two chits with two possibilities and place it at Swami and you pray and choose one. But from your perspective, if you want to get guidance or a particular answer from Swami to a question or a situation, how does one separate whether it's coming from the ego or from that inner Sai self, to know that this is what divinity is saying as opposed to the ego? How do you differentiate?
Well, I cannot comment on how each person is going to get guidance for his or her questions from Bhagavan, because Bhagavan uses many ways to instruct his devotees as to what to do in life. But one of the important teachings I had from him was that whenever the mind is given more importance in making decision, always ego plays a role in arriving at the decision which is favorable to you temporarily. So I should not become a victim of that. This is what Bhagavan said. So I always tend to be cautious that whether my mind is playing a trick. That is why I gave the example to you about my mother and my service commitment at Prashant Nilayam. Even when you're very careful, suddenly your mind will start asking you questions. In order to get a way out of following strictly what is truth and what you want to follow, in order to be following Swami's words. Because one of the times, I think, it was a question asked by Swami and then answer was also given by Swami. He said, who is Krishna? Krishna is Bhagavad Gita, his words. Who is Swami? Swami is Swami's words. So I think even if Swami is not seen in physical form, his words will always live as eternal truth. I think that is the Vedas, that is the Bhagavad Gita, that is the Shastras, that is the gospel. And there is no other interpretation to his words. So I think, in order to get guidance, I think his words will definitely give guidance when approached with reverence and sincerity, in my opinion. Sairam.
Thank you very much for sharing that, sir. And our final question, Dr. Vishwanathan, is when we look around in the society today, we cannot help but observe that there is so much of pain, of suffering, wars between nations. The COVID-19 pandemic has brought about economic depression, unprecedented debt, loss of lives, loss of income, families are destroyed. But Swami has said that he has come to create a better society, a more value based society through the practicing of these human values. So, my question to you is based on your experience of practicing Swami's teachings, what can you share to others whose intention is to make the world a little bit more loving, a little bit more peaceful, a little bit more unified and harmonious?
I think the way in which the world is perceived by anyone is a projection of his own mind. So if the mind is still and if the mind is pure, I think you perceive the world in one particular way. And if your mind is agitated, it is perceived in a different way. So if one practices Swami's teaching, I think the mind gets to be still and it perceives the truth as truth rather than a distorted truth. So I think practicing Bhagavan's teaching will make anyone watch the magic, that there is a divine order in everything that is going on. And what appears as something which is devastating and not very happy state of affairs will eventually pass. And, there will be serenity and peace will prevail. But I think, in order to look at the world, I think one needs to have the right frame of mind in order to perceive the world. Otherwise, again, we are likely to have misinterpretation of events. That's my humble opinion. Sayadaw.
So, Dr. Veda Viswanathan, the Sri Satya Sai Global Council Trinidad and Tobago, wishes to express gratitude and appreciation to you for taking the time to share your personal journey and transformation at the divine lotus feet of our beloved Mother Sai. Your sharing, your perspective, your views, and the teachings of Bhagwan have surely benefited us, have provoked a lot of thought and introspection. And we thank Swami for this interview and the opportunity to have interacted with you. May Bhagwan Sri Satya Sai Baba continue to bless and guide you. May you continue to be the loving instrument that you are as his divine mission unfolds. Jai Sai Ram.
My loving Sairam to all of you, and thank you for giving me this opportunity. And I thank Swami again for this wonderful opportunity of interacting with you all. Sairam.